Thank you, Christine, and thank you, awesome panel. Thank you, everyone. I don't want to forget to say I see each of you and the hard and good work that you're doing, and I appreciate that. I think working with Christine and other people in community, I have more of a philosophical question perhaps, but it's something each of us can answer individually and collectively, and it's how to live with knowledge of case studies such as Christine just mentioned and many others, including our missing and murdered loved ones, how to make sense of a world and what is that something we can do, and we think about what we can do in terms of people in the legal field or government agencies or what have you, social services. And I'm thinking about what can we do in our community level and our personal level. So I'll quickly just talk about our economic system, our political system that's created a culture of violence in where we are today. And it's a call for a political case to reclaim through indigenous nationhood, our spiritual indigenous logic, and our cultural practice. And that's something we can start right now and continue on. And it can be a very awesome, important thing to do. And it's to raise awareness of what we have and to cast off, reject the things that are happening to our communities. The question to whom do we turn, I think it's how did we get here to ask that question. And I look at a global misogyny, the question of values and a question of violence. And when we say reconcile, I think we really mean remediate, to put everything back together that's been broken apart, to answer that to whom do we turn, to transform where we are now. Modern times economics, politics, and culture are now just emerging from the shadows, and I think each of us are looking at what it is and what it's done. And we're in an economic system, I am too, that really depends upon active, involved, and sustained violence. It's capitalism's eternal hunger, it can never be satiated, modern corporate and political greed. But today what's different, it's the rush for the last of every living thing. And that rush for all of the last of the biggest trees, the last of the wild salmon, and the people who are now the part of that beloved system of the environment, our indigenous people, our indigenous things, our indigenous plants, in the way of this massive resource exploitation. And at this time of tremendous wealth, we also have to understand basic needs for survival are simply unmet or completely compromised. And that's where we have the poverty and the violence that we're talking about. Access to food, water, education, healthcare are not met, which is ironically a country's true national security, and those are being compromised. So we're in an economic system whose practices equate into making life impossible for many of the world's species. How do we get to where we have a lack of justice in our communities? I think it goes back to the capitalist hierarchy. The lowest paid laborers are given the lowest status in society, whether we're talking about factory workers or a survival sex trade. Those on the lower end of the economic scale are relegated into places of violence and violations of their rights. Low monetary value, low life value. That's what modernity has given us. And we have to think about indigenous people's state-induced poverty. I think about the political exclusion and indifference, uneven application of the law, a lawless political expediency, especially of our previous prime minister, just doing away with laws which protected land and water and marine animals, for example, a violation of treaty rights and nation-to-nation agreements. That is the lawlessness, and I think we see that trickle down into the lawlessness in communities and individuals and societies. These two things, this economic system and this political system, created what I mean by a culture of violence. It's abuse and a carnage of all living things, and it's something that is new. It's an import. It's not the indigenous logic of this place. So when we ask for a reclaiming of what's indigenous, you think about, well, What was the role of particular supernaturals in this landscape place, when those supernaturals were the grizzly bear, the wild salmon, the wolves, the plants, the camas, all of those things that were danced to and thought of in clan relationships. They were more than just things. They were not the commodity that the capitalist system has made them into. If we think about this condemnation, if you will, of modernity, I think you just look at what is called by the historians the greatest invention of the 21st century, and it's what? The nuclear bomb. The greatest minds of the West, the greatest scientific minds, those are quotes as history thinks of those makers of the nuclear bomb. And I'm thinking of state-sponsored violence, such as the making of the war machine, and its impact on domestic and community violence. If it's accepted at the state level, at the highest federal level, what does that tell us? What does that tell our children and our families about the role of violence? It's a tolerance for something unacceptable. Habitat destruction, destruction of our families, destruction of the land. The extractionist cults is a devaluation, objectification, turning things from sacred life to commodity, where something can just be purchased and used in whatever way the purchaser wishes to use that living being. Subjugates beings with autonomous, interdependent lives. What to do? It's really easy to lose one's bearings when thinking about these things. We can think about our language, use the right words, things that are acceptable. We say bomb or nuclear annihilation, radioactive waste, critical mass. We use those kinds of things all the time, but they mean really terrible things. When it's not acceptable to say things such as indigenous nationhood, sovereignty, sacred wild salmon. So we have to be careful with our language and push for what really is truly important. Modernity's accepted vision of the tar sands. It's okay to look at that, but it's not okay to look at this call for national justice for our indigenous people. And I think about our original ways, saw and knew, had an original system of respect, faith in all living beings, and to return to these pleas. I think of words that people have shared with me throughout my life, and I will never forget this beautiful sacred land, the one of my birth, the places I have lived, the one I live in now. I will never stop loving this sacred place and those places. I will never stop holding her near and all of her beings. And what I hear in community, we will never forget our loved ones. We will never stop looking for them, and we will never stop striving for their justice. Turn to our heart, our sacred, beautiful land, live for her, and create direct action with the other strong hearts. And I think you're all strong hearts here because of the work that you do. Recreate indigenous systems in community for community. It's not a neutral position. It demands personal involvement. But we begin like this story. I'm sorry to have to start with those painful words, but end in hopeful action. Thank you.